This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. With only, 6 weeks, I believe, left to go as we are recording this podcast of regular NBA season. And the next thing, playoff time. So teams are definitely ready to make them playoff push. Some guys off injury coming back, ready to help their teams make that move. We are definitely keeping our finger on the pulse of all that stuff, man. Let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, 50 grand, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, been out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Everything good, man, in your neck of the woods?
It's good as always, brother, because I'm here talking NBA basketball with you, brother. So you know what it is, man. And salute to all the fans, listeners of NBA Baseline. We've got a doozy of an episode coming up here, man, talking about don't get a lot of love. And, you know, we love to show all the respect possible when it comes to some of these NBA teams out there. We cover all 30, get into the G League. We talk off the court business as well, too, on the Baseline NBA podcast. So I think it's going to be a good one. And, you know, bringing back an old favorite. Can't wait to hear that Pete Rock and CL Smooth, you know, on one of our favorite segments, bro.
Yeah, man. So in a little bit, we have a Will They Reminisce Over You take, and we will be discussing the 2001-2002 Sacramento Kings. Cowbell Kingdom, where you at? Man, we're going to be talking about the rise and fall of a great NBA team, a great NBA season, and what could have been. But in a little bit, man, we have a great guest on board with us, Scott Agness from The Athletic, at-large writer, premier writer. He discusses things, regarding Indiana Pacers, but covers a whole lot more. He's going to help us talk about this Indiana Pacers team, and are they a for-real team in the Eastern Conference? Great conversation to be had with this dude, man, so you definitely want to check that out. Once again, we appreciate you and yours for tuning into the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline, available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. We are also available on Instagram, so we always encourage you guys, if you want to catch the latest episode of the Baseline NBA podcast, we're always posting. And you know us, man, we always love hosting as well, too. So be sure to go on any major platform, find us where you can, throw us on, and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. You can also catch us on Dash Radio, exclusively through Nothing But Net radio network. So always catch us Tuesday mornings, 9 a.m. Allow us to be your morning ride to get you live for the NBA. You know how we do. You know how we roll. Let's get it started with the breakdown. Time to break it down. To the bone gristle. Time now for the breakdown. Callie Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And joining us to talk about the Indiana Pacers and how relevant they will be in this stretch of games and ultimately for the Eastern Conference playoff picture. We have one of the premier writers who's been keeping track of everything happening in the NBA, especially the Indiana Pacers. We have Scott Agness from The Athletic. Scott, thanks for hopping on board with us this week.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for the invite. Final 6 weeks of the season. It's getting down to crunch time, isn't it?
I mean, well, and I'm kind of curious, especially for someone who writes for such a premier outlet like The Athletic. What's the fervor for you? Is it really coming down to those final weeks, or has it been because of the craziness that's kind of taken place, especially with the injury to Victor Oladipo and the unpredictability of where the Indiana Pacers may wind up being as we get down to these final stretch of games?
Yeah, so the focus has turned past Victor at this point. That was certainly, and understandably so, the focus for the first couple of weeks. But at this point, he hadn't been with the team in more than a month and a half. He had his surgery in Miami, where he has an off-season home, and he actually owns his own gym down there, which he has obviously 24-hour access to. And so since he's been away from the team, since he's rehabbing and doing all the surgery on his own, we've kind of now been able to move past it a little bit. And yeah, as you mentioned, kind of the big surprise has been that they've been able to carry on at this point of where they're at. And they're still third in the Eastern Conference, although Philadelphia is a threat right there. And we're going to see those two square off in less than a week on national TV. So that will be a lot of fun. But at this point in the season, we're looking towards how these teams handle these final games. And for the Pacers in particular, how they handle this March schedule, because it gets brutal, which I'm sure we'll get into, with 8 of 11 on the road, 10 of those games against playoff teams.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can jump right into that right now. I mean, Indiana, in a lot of ways, will be the masters of their own fate to some degree, because they will play teams that are vying or jockeying for the same position. They'll play Philadelphia. They'll play the Celtics twice as well, too. In addition to, again, key matchups with OKC and the Clippers, the Warriors, the Nuggets. So they have a hellacious stretch ahead of them. I mean, yeah, it's real, real rough. And but they're gonna, whatever happens, they'll at least they'll be able to look themselves in the mirror and say, okay, well, we mastered our own fate, so to speak. But when the Oladipo injury went down, like you said, we're a month and change removed from that. I actually live in the Miami area, so I'm very familiar with kind of what he's doing down here as well too. What was the immediate sentiment, even from you as an analyst looking at this team? Did you think they would falter and probably slip down into that 5 seed, which I guess is still technically possible? Or did you feel like, you know what, this team has so much gumption, they're just going to find a way to rise up? What was your initial feeling, despite what you have seen so far?
Yeah, my initial feeling was there's no question this is a playoff team. They're a good overall, complete team. And also after that first top 5 teams in the East, we've seen that there's a substantial drop after that. And I forget the numbers at this point, but back then, which was all the way back on January 23rd against Toronto, I think the Pacers would have had to finish the season less than 500 to have a threat of not making the postseason. So that was without doubt going to happen. I have been a little surprised they've been able to remain in third, but I think it's more so related to Philadelphia and Boston, who haven't quite gotten their act together. The Pacers, to their credit, have handled their schedule throughout February. They did that very well because it was favorable towards them with so many opponents under 500, and it was quite almost got to a hilarious point during the trade deadline week when they just lucked out. They played at New Orleans, no Anthony Davis. Then they played the Lakers, and that was of the trade deadline week when all the rumors were swirling right around the Lakers and what potential moves ideally geared towards Anthony Davis. Then the Clippers, who made more moves than any other franchise, had just 9 true guys available when they played, and then they faced a poor Cleveland team. So during that February stretch where the Pacers rode so many different their schedule and were able to pick up all those wins, it was more so just taking advantage of their schedule.
Scott Agness joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. You can catch him on Twitter at Scott Agness, and that's SCOTTAGNESS. So, Scott, it's great that you're bringing up that particular point, because I think where I want to come in on this is the legitimacy of the Indiana Pacers because of the circumstances of what's happening in the Eastern Conference. Everyone is looking at, where a team like the Indiana Pacers fit in the picture of either playing spoiler or being a legitimate contender to make a run in this year's playoffs. And I think part of that benchmark is who's going to step up after Oladipo goes down. And I just want to get your perspective from this, because I think in a way, the Indiana Pacers can clearly be a team holistically that could be a threat up and down the board for most of these other teams because they're seasoned, because of what they did coming off of last season. But they easily could be aligned like a team like the Brooklyn Nets, who they could wind up limping into the playoffs. And while as a team they look good, they don't look like a legitimate threat for anyone that they play. So those games that we're talking about, those stretch of games remaining, is so important because of where they're going to wind up being seeded wise. But can we say that if you're the Indiana Pacers, they are a legitimate team holistically that could be a threat up and down any pecking order of this year's Eastern Conference playoff picture?
I can't go that far, quite honestly, because I think you look at the ceiling of this team, right? And a legitimate threat to make the playoffs, yes. To win a series, maybe 2, yes. But for me, I define a legitimate threat in this Eastern Conference as a team that should make the conference finals, really could, and had a significant chance at making that NBA Finals. And I didn't think that even before the season, even with a healthy Victor Oladipo and with this group coming together like they have impressively. I think the biggest change in losing Victor for the season is the likelihood of reaching the conference finals dropped significantly. I was on board thinking they'd probably make the conference finals, best case scenario. Now, I think the best case would be to get out of that first round. which depending on where they add up right now in the 3-6, which is what it would be against Brooklyn. I like their chances because the Pacers have dominated Brooklyn, in fact, over the recent history. But what if they drop one spot? Philly trumps them by one, and it's at 4-5 with Boston. Boston clearly has more talent, but I'd take the Pacers purely on chemistry.
Well, I think, right now that would be a great prediction, because I think that is one thing that Indiana does seem to be having going for them, with the exception of Milwaukee and Toronto, is the fact that, they do seem to really care about each other. Nate McMillan has them buying in, whatever he's saying on the sidelines. And we've been very critical, I think, of Nate on our podcast over the years. And, what he's done the last couple of seasons here in Indiana is nothing short of remarkable with this group. And even the fact that this team is second defensive rating right now as well, too, I think is proof positive of what Nate wants to do and how they need to play. So let's talk about that a little bit, in terms of that. I'm sure he's a guy who stayed positive and, when old people went down, et cetera, coming into the season and is pressing all the right buttons. But talk about the contributions he's able to get kind of across the board and how he does seem to be pushing the right buttons to keep his team on the right track.
Yeah, well, first of all, you're dead on. Nate McMillan, the head coach of the Pacers, deserves a lot of credit. Last year, he finished top 5 in Coach of the Year balloting, and I think he should be probably top 3 this year. If you look at the job he's done, the talent he's had, and Bud probably would be a favorite, but you also have an MVP caliber guy in Giannis Antetokounmpo, and a lot of their talent has remained the same with the Bucks. And so, more than anything, I think the Pacers should be right there. Denver's Mike Malone should receive serious contribution. I was one that didn't quite understand, honestly, the change from Frank Vogel to Nate McMillan. In my eyes, I go, if you're promoting an assistant, if an assistant can really make that significant of a contribution, why hasn't he done that already, maybe as that assistant coach? But I think Nate has shut us all up. He's proven us all wrong. And one thing I want to give him credit to is his ability to adapt, because in Portland, in his previous situation more than a decade ago, he got nicknamed Sarge. He was demanding. He was the guy that it was my way or the highway. This, and talking to players, is very much a different situation. He's open to conversation. He has an open door policy. If guys, their bodies just aren't feeling right, maybe they'll just do film, or maybe they'll take the day off, where in years past, he'd say, hey, suck it up. No, we're practicing. This is what I always did. This is what we're going to do. So adapt has been the key word as it relates to Nate. And then moving forward, I think the guy that I've warranted the most credit to has been Bojan Bogdanovic, a guy that when the Pacers signed him 2 years ago, he was coming from a situation with the Washington Wizards, just 26 games there. We all knew he could shoot the ball. He was a foreigner that could shoot it, but is that it? Was that his limited abilities? But again, he has proven us all wrong. His defense has been not just solid, but really sound in what he's tried to do. Last year, we saw that in the playoffs when doing as good a job as you could guarding LeBron James in the first round. And then he's taken his game to another notch this year with his aggressiveness and attacking the paint and getting to the rack.
I couldn't agree with you more, Scott. I think even like in the month of February, Bogdanovic was averaging close to like 23 points per game in that month. And it seems like he's found some kind of symmetry with how he is able to score the basketball for Nate McMillan and for this Indiana Pacers. But now it comes down to, who on this team does Nate lean on to really step up during these critical stretches of ball games? There's talent across the board. There obviously it is not above, the peak talent, but there's some form of talent. They're going to have to lean on somebody to come through.
And that's really what they've leaned on is one guy goes down. It's not great, but guess what? We can lean on a ton of different guys, whereas so many other teams, let's take New Orleans, for example. You lose Anthony Davis, who is probably that top 5 caliber in the league. That is a significant loss, whereas the Pacers, if any of which guys are out, they can manage. But you bring up a good point, because come the playoffs, that's where you need playmakers. That's, in fact, why the Pacers president, Kevin Pritchard, went out and got Tyreek Evans in the offseason. He sought after another playmaker to play alongside Victor come the playoffs, when you just need buckets, when you just are in that winning time and crunch time. That's the one unproven thing with this Pacers team that I'm not sure will get answered until mid-April come the playoffs.
Before you jump in, Shaw, I want to ask you that question, though. Scott, because I don't know if I'll pray that we can get you on. It's again at some point come playoff time. But I'm just curious, who has the opportunity to really shine? Can it be Tyreek Evans, or how about even Miles Turner? Can this be their moment where they really are worth the goods because they're on a playoff team, because they're going to be in the prime time, because they're going to be in spotlight, and they're not going to be overshadowed by Oladipo? Who do you see between, say, those two dudes that actually can elevate themselves to be in that conversation from what you've seen so far?
Sure. Well, for one, I'll preface it by saying I think with these caliber of players, I don't see them maybe ever becoming that top 10, top 15 guy. But for needing a guy to step up in a series, I'll take Miles Turner, quite honestly, because his defense is warranting votes for Defensive Player of the Year. I'm not sure he'll get them to win it all, but I believe he's truly a top three guy that should warrant those votes because he leads the league in blocks. He leads the league in blocks per game. When he's out, and he's missed time recently, he had a broken nose. He's dealt with several other injuries. You can see, just watching the Pacers defense, how much of a significant loss that is because of the rim protection he provides inside. So I think Miles Turner, who signed a contract extension right before the start of the season, would be a guy that could step up. Another guy is Wesley Matthews. He's a guy that just joined the Pacers, has played less than 10 games with them. He's in a contract year. He chose the Pacers because he was promised a starting spot. And I got to believe he's playing not only for this season to have some success, but also to perhaps sign a long-term contract, whether it's here or somewhere else, maybe that last big contract for him. And he's just been a perfect fit in less than 2 weeks with the franchise, in my estimation.
Excellent analysis there, Scott. And it brings me back to, I think, a long-lasting question here on our show. When we discuss the Pacers, we do talk about Miles Turner a lot. And I think what he does on the defensive side of the basketball, again, is immeasurable. But it is the offense, which is a little bit spotty at times. And, I just want to get your sentiment as someone who covers the team on a regular basis. Is there growing frustration with his lack of consistency on that side of the basketball? Or because of the fact that Oladipo and other guys and now Bogdanovich have kind of stepped up where he can kind of not necessarily hide or just maybe even more so focus on the defensive side. But I think for a while, it'd be hard to say that we wouldn't expect a little bit more from Miles Turner. And why he's shooting 50% from the field and, getting around 6-7 rebounds a game. Those are solid numbers. Are we just expecting too much from him?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think, we should expect a little bit more from him offensively. He's about 13 points per game. I think he's probably a 15, 16 points per game. But to your last point, you have to temper your expectations a little bit. This is a guy that is built on defense and in providing that rim protection. So, no, you should absolutely not expect this guy to, on a regular basis, throw down 22 points, 10 rebounds, and 4 blocks. That's just not who he is, and I'm not sure he'll ever be. Although I would love for him to prove us wrong. He's only 22. He hadn't even hit his prime. He's not even into his second contract yet. But I think realistically, if he could become a 16-point, 7 rebound, and 2 block guy per game, that's perfect as your starting center, especially as we've seen the center position evolve because he's making that impact around the rim, whether it's blocks or not. And one of the best things, guys, about his block is that so many of them he's able to keep in play, and that's by design. You could go for the highlight block where you send it 4 rows deep into the stands, but that doesn't help your team much, doesn't get back the possession. So I give him credit for that. He's also stretched the floor, and the one thing I'd like to see from him in his shooting is too often he backs away from the shot. He fades away from the shot, pulls out too early, and that's really when he misses. Now he's shooting 40% from 3, but I think he actually is a much better 3-point shooter.
Scott Agness joining us here from on the Baseline NBA podcast as we're talking Indiana Pacers. Be sure to catch his awesome writing as he is an at-large writer for The Athletic. So, Scott, coming back to this critical stretch, what are your expectations for the Indiana Pacers to come out in a position, to your point, about possibly taking that initial series in the playoffs or even putting themselves in a position where they can make that, what I guess is not going to be this unpredictable run that they if they could make it. Like, what are your expectations in this stretch of basketball as far as wins, losses, to put them in a good position for them to maintain what they're currently doing?
Yeah, I think if you could just avoid that that losing streak, if you will, a 3 or 4 game losing streak. For example, they're coming up on a road trip at Milwaukee, Philadelphia. Both high intensity games, both will be televised nationally. You could splint that. I think that's a big win. And to the Pacers' credit, they've been a very good team on the road, better than 500, 17 wins already on the road. And for the 30th straight season, they're having a winning record on their home court. That's the longest active streak of any franchise currently. So they've taken care of home court and won on the road. I think they have to avoid that losing streak. And I think you try to get some healthy bodies again. We saw Tyreke Evans miss some time due to food poisoning. He had shrimp tacos, and that took him out of the lineup for 2 games. Domantas Sabonis rolled his ankle up in Detroit. He's currently out, and that's telling because Sabonis is a hard-nosed foreign guy who hates missing time. He'll play on a bad injury before he rather sit out. So if they could get him back, that would be clutch. And back to Tyreke Evans, they need more out of him. He played the other night, and in his first game back, 1 for 5, I think maybe 2 points. That's unacceptable for a guy that's essentially your 7th man and brought in to be your second 2 guard off the bench. He has to provide you probably double figures in every game. And then I think it's just building that rhythm. Maybe if they can go, I don't know, win 6 of these 11 games coming up on that very difficult stretch. As sad as it sounds, I think that would be a big win. It's a 4-game West Coast trip that's a part of that, including a stop in Golden State. You got to take advantage of those wins, which they did earlier. We'll just see if they can maintain it here coming up in mid-March.
Well, I think those are great points again too. I think on our show previous before the season began, coming off what Tyreke did specifically in Memphis last year, I was like, wow, this could be a mega pickup for the Pacers. And I was actually pegging Tyreke as a sleeper candidate for 6 man, and how off was I?
And you're not alone there.
Yeah,
but I saw several people lead national guys say, hey, this makes too much sense. Pacers need that playmaker. Tyreek's in a contract year, and he's one of actually 6 guys in a contract year. And to the Pacers' credit, they haven't allowed that to disrupt what they tried to do, or chemistry, fighting over points or minutes, which I thought was a concern going on at the beginning of the season. Nate McMillan addressed it the first day of camp and hasn't ever since. So that's telling about this group.
Right. So that actually, again, I feel like you're here reading my notes here, Scott, because, I do want to talk about that a little bit too. This is a squad has all these expiring. We didn't think Thaddeus Young was going to opt into his deal, but he did come back and still an integral part of that starting lineup right now as well too. But contract year for him, Tyreke, as you mentioned, Bogdanovich contract year, Collison contract year, Corey Joseph, Kyle Quinn, even all these guys who play massive parts. And again, even the most recently cited Wesley Matthews. Is this a situation now that Oladipo's got 2 years left? Turner now has got an extension, has his money. Is this a situation where they're going to try to be big players in free agency, or do they just really try to run this back? And we all know the history with the ownership and them not wanting to spend, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But with this group and what McMillan has been able to build, do they just run it back and give everybody kind of friendly deals, so to speak, with options? Or do they go out there and try to make a big splash? What is your overall sentiment, you think, what they might do in that area?
I was talking to someone inside the front office the other day, and I'll tell you what, I'm glad that's not my decision, because that's a very tough one at this point, because you see and you do not take for granted the way this team has come together. Many inside the locker room, and I'm not talking players, I'm talking staff who have been there a decade or 2 decades, are believing now at this point, as we're probably 75% into the season, that this might be the best locker room that they have been around within the Pacers franchise. Before, it was maybe last year. The other team you could argue is that 2013-14 season that won a ton of games. I think it was like 62 games maybe, and reached the conference finals for the 2nd straight year against the Miami Heat. And so from that standpoint, the togetherness of this team, I'd be hard pressed not to run it back within reason. Now, you're not going to bring everybody back, but maybe bring 3 or 4 of those guys. Domantas Sabonis, he's very likely going to get an extension this off season, as he becomes extension eligible on July 1 with this franchise. A lot of it will also depend at the stage in life for guys in their careers of what they're seeking, right? Because you look ahead to a guy like Darren Collison, who last year had his best year yet. This year hadn't been much of a drop-off. Well, he turns 32 before the start of the next season. So does he want to stay in this winning, stable situation, or does he value maybe that last big contract, a la former Pacer George Hill? And I don't fault him at all. That's just what he went after in signing with Sacramento, and then has since bounced around to 3 or 4 different teams. But in my conversations with the veterans like Darren and like Thaddeus Young, I truly believe they actually value the culture that's been built within this franchise and being in a stable situation much more than a couple $1 million, let's say. The two guys that I think, unless the market is just ridiculous for them, I think you absolutely bring back Bogdanovich and Young, because they've made too big of contributions both on and off the court. I can't speak highly enough, actually, guys, about Thaddeus Young's leadership, and that's a story you'll be able to read in the next week or two on The Athletic. I thought David West was something special. Young has taken that to a whole different level within this locker room, in my estimation.
Scott, I got one question left to ask you here, and it's really in regards to what will happen for this team. You guys like really laid everything out, and I guess where I fall into this is, let's just say that the Indiana Pacers wind up grabbing 50 plus wins, which is obviously a realistic expectation for this team. Most of
And
these
very likely at this point, yeah.
yeah. So most of these type of teams that are built off of coming off of a key player being injured, you begin to start looking at what's their window of opportunity, and what's their window of growth, right? Because you can easily be a team where, based on these pieces that you decide to re-sign and keep, the Sabonis's, the Bogdanoviches, if he just chooses to stay in this situation, what Oladipo might be when once he comes back and everything like that, you begin to start wondering, whether or not these guys are going to elevate themselves. And you build around the fact that they could be playing in some kind of, NBA finals in some point in the future, or this could be like something of false hope. Like, you'll have these great spells where the best that they can achieve is get to an Eastern Conference Finals, but then you recognize that they may not get any better than that, and then you just kind of are stuck in this level. I don't want to use the word mediocrity, but they're stuck in this constant groove where they get to a certain point and then that's it. Kind of like the Memphis Grizzlies.
Well, exactly. I think that's what it is. Like, they
Right.
become the Memphis Grizzlies or the Atlanta Hawks. You know what I mean?
Right. So that's where I'm curious, Scott. What do you think happens if they get, they achieve or they overachieve, so to speak? Is that a false narrative for people to look at? Because we've seen years where the Indiana Pacers have been legitimate, they've been great, but they're not hoisting trophies, and you begin to wonder where people start getting anxious, and then Pritchard and these guys start making moves that are too risky, that then compromises all of everything that they've been doing over the last couple of years.
So actually, I see it quite the opposite. For one, this franchise has been a model of consistency, second to only the Spurs, I believe, over the last 2 decades. In the last 30 years, and I'll include this year in that, they've reached the postseason 24 times. So they're reaching it. But to your point, it's like, is that good enough? Are you satisfied with that? Or do you want to take it to the next level? And of course you want to. The trouble, I think, a little bit is, guys, the market size and what kind of talent you're able to attract. I was having this conversation a couple days ago. Consider the Pacers this season with J.J. Redick versus Tyreke Evans. J.J. was, as he told me, was minutes away from signing with the Pacers for almost the same money, maybe less, but ultimately decided to go back to the Philadelphia 76ers. He's having a career year this year, starting for the 76ers. And I think that's a realistic free agent hopeful, right? One of the best shooters this game has ever seen, a guy that can start, he can come off the bench. This Pacers team, they realize they're not in play for these tier 1 free agents. Giannis in a couple of years is not going to consider the Pacers. Klay Thompson this summer, not considering the Pacers. So that's where they have to really lock in and have a good scouting department to find guys that maybe aren't a good fit for their current situation. And a perfect example of that, honestly, is Domantas Sabonis. Now, he was just 1 year into his situation with the Oklahoma City Thunder, but they were spreading him out. They were having him shoot threes. He comes to the Pacers and is thriving. He's in a much different situation. He's able to use his natural skills and his footwork and his finesse around the basket. That's more so what the Pacers are trying to do, and they understand is their realistic situation. Last year, they had no All-Stars before Victor rose and became one, and he was named again this year. I think Miles Turner, Domantas Sabonis are on fringe All-Stars. the Pacers understand they need at least one more All-Star, realistically two, to be quote unquote a contender, a threat to reach the conference finals and the finals. Until then, they're going to win games. They're going to be a 40-win team and continue to pile up wins. But yeah, they need to make that next level. And I think that starts with re-signing their own this season, several of those guys like we talked about, and then being able to hit on one, perhaps two guys in free agency who understand the value of what the Pacers can offer them in a stable situation where winning is guaranteed almost.
Final one, Scott, just point blank. Do the Pacers hold on to the number 3 seed?
I'm going to say no, just because this schedule is brutal. I've talked about it at length, but I think the Pacers will fall behind 76ers. And from what I've seen, they've been better and been playing better than Boston. And that would set up for a Pacers-Celtics series in round 1.
True to his word, boy. Scott Agness bringing the funk, bringing the fire to us here this week on the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to check him out, man. He just writes awesome articles for The Athletic. And if you want to, catch him on Twitter at Scott Agness. Scott, man, we appreciate you hopping on board and shedding some well-deserved light on one of the most successful franchises, as you've put it, in the last couple of decades, that being the Indiana Pacers, brother.
I appreciate it. And as the players would like to say, no one's respecting us. So I was happy to provide a little insight there on the Pacers because, yeah, quite frankly, they don't get the national conversation, even though they are deserving with that number 3 spot right now.
No doubt. My man Scott saying put some respect on their name, that being the Indiana Pacers. You're tuned to the Baseline.
All right, good to talk with you guys.
All right, brother. You're tuned to the Baseline. Kylie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was the breakdown.
To reminisce over you. Listen.
Time to reminisce. Will they reminisce over you? Let us, the Baseline NBA podcast, reminisce. This is one of those segments that we often like to kind of delve into, the yesteryears of teams and players, moments in NBA history, and really kind of, dig into it a little bit more. Maybe, even give insight to some of our younger listeners about, what a particular team, franchise, player did and how it could affect not only that time period, but also could affect the future of the NBA. So we're going to jump in our time machines, man. And in this series, we're going to look back at a team that kind of highlights the what if questions or the what if scenarios. What if the 2001-2002 Sacramento Kings, given the fact that they were among the best teams in the NBA practically throughout the season, were literally one game away from finding themselves playing for an NBA championship? What would we be saying about the Chris Webbers, the Mike Bibbys of that time period? The Rick Adelmans. What would we be etched on their record of history had they gotten past that Los Angeles Lakers team in the Western Conference Finals? So it's a really interesting question, Shaw, because when people talk about the Sacramento Kings, they talk more about the controversy of the series rather than looking at the team holistically, what they did to get to that point, and the honest breadth of the conversation of the type of talent that they had on that team that made them so special to even get to that point.
Sacramento at that time was the rival of the LA Lakers. Those three-peat LA Lakers, Kobe, Shaq Lakers, Sacramento was the antithesis of that. Cowbell Kingdom, the great blog kind of has its name as a result of the Cowbells that started during that time when the Sacramento Kings kind of rose to prominence. And we can trace it back to the Chris Webber trade. He was in Washington and got traded to Sacramento and reportedly was very unhappy about getting over there to begin with. And but then realized there was nothing else there for him to do but play basketball and to better his craft. And we saw Webber put some MVP caliber type seasons where he was in consideration for that award for multiple years. But that 0-1-0 team was extremely, extremely special. garnering 60-plus games, 61 wins rather, finishing first, actually besting the Lakers, in terms of record, best team in the NBA record-wise, and many thought was going to have an opportunity to go on and compete for the NBA championship. But those pesky Lakers came about. We had some chicanery and some trickery from the referees that were involved, free throw disparities, the whole nine. But one of the biggest shots in NBA history in terms of, if you're a fan that you've seen 1,000 times over, that Robert Horry 3 on the Vlade Divac tip out really set that series kind of back in motion in favor of the LA Lakers.
I mean, how many times have we seen the Los Angeles Lakers, really rip the hearts out of knowingly good, you know, teams? When you were on the precipice of believing that the San Antonio Spurs were supposed to defeat the Los Angeles Lakers. And anytime that you have a situation where you almost get that feeling, that tingling sensation, Mike Bibby, Chris Webber, Peja Stojakovic, Vlade Divac, you have that kind of team. Doug Christie, you have that kind of team. Damn, man. How long do you think that we were just talking about this a few moments ago with our man Sky Agness, right? When you have a good team and this jaw-dropping moment, people are stuck on the surface about what it looks like, from an optics perspective, right? Just looks bad. But I'm just talking about how that kind of impact emotionally carries for players and individuals who have already been doing great things and have begun to realize that there's this window that just seems to be continually closing in on them. Not Father Time. I'm talking about closing in on them because they don't know how long they can keep up doing what they're doing and it not bear fruit to them winning something significant that they feel is worthy of their sacrifice and their effort. You know what I mean? And that to me is, I think, the biggest takeaway that I got from the Sacramento Kings. You started beginning to see the chink in the armor. That I don't know how long they think that they thought that they could be this good. And I think that's why the emotional outcry was so severe. To many people, I think it was more about the Los Angeles Lakers, because people are just sick and tired of the Lakers and the Lakers winning and ruining everything. It's like how people are treating this dynasty of the Golden State Warriors. But I think an honest appreciation has to be made if you're the Sacramento Kings, because now you look at how long it's been since the Kings have been a relevant basketball team. And all people can draw back to is this 2001, 2002 timeframe. But again, it just makes me wonder about how long they think that they could have kept this going had they gotten past the Los Angeles Lakers.
Well, yeah, it probably sets their team up just for years to come. I mean, they were still very good, in terms of their record, regular season wise, kind of matriculating through the NBA. They unfortunately ended up suffering second round losses in the following subsequent years, despite having better records even in the regular season than the Lakers, I think, in those years as well too. But that specific series in 01-02 was their best shot. And people don't even realize that was a series or a season where Weber only played, I think, 54 games in that season. So Stojakovic just in his third year. Turkoglu was a rookie that year, and Mike Bibby was really the catalyst in the playoffs, especially against the Lakers specifically. Vlade, magnificent as again one of the true great passing centers in the NBA at that time as well too. Guys like Scott Pollard, Bobby Jackson, six man of the year kind of candidate, Doug Christie. They just really had a complete basketball team that was poised to really dominate for years to come. But it's just one of those situations. They lost to the Mavericks, I think, the year after that, and then they lost to the Minnesota Timberwolves in the year that Garnett was just basting the entire league, and he won MVP. So it was just tough that, again, it didn't happen for them in 01-02, but all the metrics were on their side. One of the best teams offensively, best teams defensively, third and sixth respectively. Pace wise, they were first in that team, first there. And this was after they'd kind of come off of previous success too, when they had Jason Williams. But when they got Mike Bibby, it really just set them to another level. And that team really kind of came together. Rick Adelman and Jeff Petrie, those guys put together a roster and a team that was in essence feared, I think, in a lot of ways. And nobody saw the Kings coming. And when they came hard. And so I think I remember seeing me on the cover of Sports Illustrated in terms of, wow, look what's happening in this kind of pseudo small market town. Again, Cowbell Kingdom arose, but that Lakers series, man, it took the wind and sails out of what could have been a dynasty for the Sacramento Kings.
Yeah, and look, the Kings head and shoulders have proven to have been the best team in the NBA uh throughout the regular season. But just think about it in the division that they were in. The Lakers, the Portland Trailblazers had 49 wins that season, right? They were close to a 50-win team. The Supersonics, so they had four teams coming out of that division that participated in the playoffs. And to me, it just speaks volumes. And the one thing that I really found remarkable about this Kings team is that this is the team that gave everything to everybody, right? Like if they couldn't do it for their own, they certainly allowed the NBA to flourish in different ways. You think about on this roster, they had Hedo Turkoglu. Hedo Turkoglu had a second crack at that apple when he started playing for the Orlando Magic. They also had Bobby Jackson. People don't talk about Bobby Jackson, but Bobby Jackson was one of those guys that in that era he really started to elevate the role player of the sixth man. Um, for that time frame in the beginning of the 2000s, he was that dude. Um, Scott Pollard, another common fixture. Indiana Pacers fans can appreciate a good Scott Pollard for their team. So, this roster that Rick Adelman had, I'm sure that I think he felt crushed. Next to the teams that he had in Portland, this again was another opportunity for him to possibly find himself playing in an NBA Finals. And I think maybe more than anyone else, he was the one that felt really bad about not getting those guys over the hump. And listen, we can say what we want about, the atrocious referee calling, in that series and stuff like that. But I think at its most critical moment, that's probably part and parcel where Rick Adelman feels like, man, I should have figured out a way. I should have found a way to channel something in these guys to get beyond that, to get past that. And he never had that shot, that second chance to redeem himself for what did happen. Greg Popovich did, after what happened. I'm not sorry, Greg Popovich, but who am I thinking of? Mike D'Antoni. He had numerous opportunities where he could have helped elevate the Phoenix Suns to a certain degree. When the San Antonio Spurs put them in that situation, and he had Steve Nash, and he had Finley, he had Stoudemire and those boys and stuff like that. And I'm just saying to myself, wow, this was a one-time opportunity for us to see greatness coming out of Cobble Kingdom, because we really never saw much of this type of team do what they did except for that season.
Yeah, I mean, again, those are all great points. They even had Gerald Wallace on that team, his rookie
Right, they
year as well,
drafted
too.
that
So,
kid, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and Mateen Cleaves was a year in as well too, second year. Mateen Cleaves coming out of Michigan State, so young point guard, with some grit and some guts, who came out there and spelt Mike Bibby every now and then as well too. And I mean, all the guys, you name everybody, even Lawrence Funderburk, he had his nice little moments. Chucky Brown. It was a team that was just very well put together. The chemistry was great on and off the basketball floor. And again, all the metrics favored them. They didn't foul a whole lot. They, despite leading the league in pace, they didn't really turn the ball over all that much as well too. One of the best defensive rebounding team, the best defensive rebounding team in the league that season as well too. Just everything was heading for that team to potentially get there. And we all know what ends up happening. The old adage of, oh, well, did Commissioner Stern at that time want to see, two small market, quote unquote, teams potentially in the NBA Finals? I think that was the year the Nets, I think, got to the finals. So the Kings and the Nets would have been that, and it could have been a ratings disaster. But Sacramento was garnering so much, I think, fandom around the NBA because of their style of play. They played fast. They hit hard. They rebounded. They had everybody could pass the basketball. And they were shooting threes as well too. So Stojakovic, shooting 4 threes a game at that time. Imagine him playing now. He'd be probably shooting 8 or 9 threes a game. Given today's NBA era. But I think that Sacramento team definitely got shortchanged, and it would have been nice. And, this is nothing against the Laker faithful, so to speak, but it just would have been nice to see that small market team get to the NBA Finals and what they could have did and what they could have become, because that really, truly could have set all kinds of precedent for the league and the various storylines as an offshoot. Again, seeing a team of that ilk be successful, especially in multiple years, you just feel like if they would have got to the championship and won, it just propels them in a different trajectory than it did in subsequent seasons when they lost to Dallas and Minnesota. So, shout out to the Kings and Jeff Petrie for putting that team and that roster together. Rick Adelman for the coaching job he did, and the players that hustled so hard but ultimately came up short.
All right, man. Listen, I love to talk about a team that could have done so much, man, and I think it's just remarkable, how there is there's parity, certainly, in the NBA. There definitely is parity, and for anybody to assume that these guys can just turn around and flip the switch and just do exactly what it is that they did in the previous year. This is definitely not the case for this Sacramento Kings team. 2002, 2003 definitely did not shape up the way things had happened for them in 2001, 2002, and who knows? Who knows what kind of momentum these guys would have been riding on, had they sought their destiny thoroughly and didn't get quote unquote robbed, so to speak. You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
When they reminisce over you, my God, my God. Coast to coast.
Time to go coast to coast discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
Paul Gasol bought out, then buy we out, and now he's decided to join the Bucks. Man, I'm telling you, man, this Milwaukee Bucks team, they loading up, man. Especially after what you had said is what seems to be like somewhat of a quiet buyout season. Again, some quiet moves being made for the Milwaukee Bucks, brother.
Yeah, Powell's not going to play a whole lot, but I think what you're going to get in terms of his value in the locker room, I don't think there's a better teammate in the NBA. I've watched this guy back in his days at the Memphis Grizzlies, and just how he interacted with his teammates was amazing. So to get themselves, a third big, and somebody who can, play some spot minutes behind Lopez and such. But I think just from a locker room presence and also a championship level experience as well too, Saul is going to be a welcome addition to the Milwaukee Bucks this season.
Well, I'm gonna push back on you real quick before we move into the next coast to coast line here. I think that this is an invaluable pickup for Giannis Antetokounmpo. Listen, Paul Gasol is a champion. Paul Gasol also plays the 5. And I think for Mike Budenholzer, there's going to be some lineup changes going on. Giannis is going to be all hands on deck. I think that Paul Gasol's knowledge and his championship medal, I think, is going to be vastly understated, but well needed if he is going to expect to, if there's an expectation they're going to take him to the, they're going to ride his shoulders for them to be on that next level, to eventually be playing in the Eastern Conference Finals, eventually be playing for an NBA championship. On this run in particular, I think Paul Gasol's knowledge and worth is more beneficial for Giannis than it really is just about the Bucks and what his play will be. I think this is a solid move by the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah, I mean, no dispute in terms of its weight. I think in general, I think my only concern is like how many minutes will he actually play on the floor. I think again his contribution is going to felt more so intangibly with his influence on Giannis and the rest of this team as they make a push for this year's NBA Finals. Definitely.
All right, out in Sacktown, Marvin Bagley, he's out 1 to 2 weeks. I know that this is crucial, even though that the Kings' promise of making the playoffs is starting to fade a little bit here. So this is a big blow for them.
It is, and he was starting to play so well. And I think the Kings we're doing a good job now of trying to play for now and the future, inserting Bagley into the starting lineup alongside Willie Cauley-Stein, who's obviously in the contract year himself. But Sacramento was getting great production out of Bagley as he started to really figure out the NBA game, rebounding, pushing the ball, and going as well too off the glass, shooting it acceptably well too. So and actually being able to manipulate a little bit in the post. So only thing he wasn't really doing all that great to me, I think, was passing out of the post. But again, those are all things to come. So to have this setback, and he's been nicked up the majority of the year here, it's just not ideal timing for Sacramento as they try to make this playoff push behind San Antonio and the LA Clippers.
Speaking of playoff push, the Brooklyn Nets, this is a team that at one point was 4 games above 500. They have dropped below that, and they're definitely making it an interesting final run for the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. Spencer Dinwiddie returns for the Brooklyn Nets. Shaw, what do we make of Dinwiddie's return? Not a moment too soon?
Not a moment too soon. Again, the people's champ, Spencer Dinwiddie, back on the scene. I think he dropped, I think 14 points or 20 points. I can't remember. He had a very successful comeback in that first game, and they definitely missed him. As Karis LeVert, I think has started to look like a little shell of himself, and has to be expected at the beginning of the year. But now they have everybody back, and we talked about this, I think, with Phil Watson a couple of weeks ago. What happens when everyone is back? Can they all coexist as they've all taken turns, I think, in essence, being the leading man? D'Angelo Russell has done a great job in the last couple months here, and now he has to kind of acclimate to Dinwiddie getting back, and also Karis LeVert back into the fold too. So hopefully Brooklyn holds on and continues to be in the playoff picture, because I think it's been a great season, a great story for them overall.
And finally, Shaw, Channing Frye made the announcement that he is set to retire at season's end. I got to tell you, man, I give a lot of props to Channing Frye. Like, the guy certainly achieved a lot, coming out of the University of Arizona. But I often thought, man, this guy was like just one team away from, playing internationally so many times over. And yet he summoned his best, and he found a place with teams. Obviously, his best years, I believe, was with the New York Knicks per se. And, he found himself playing alongside of, LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers. But Channing Frye, man, an interesting type of player. I often felt that he was bigger than what he actually gave the game, but at the end of it, he gave the game a lot, and I'm proud to see that he understands where he's going to be at come this season. If this is his path for him to retire, I think he's definitely gone out in a good note and has contributed a lot to the game.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. Stops in Orlando, Phoenix, and a few other places as well too, and he did make an impact there. But I think, especially in the latter years here, you saw Frye's ability to just be an exceptional teammate, a grounding force within that locker room space, has kept him around the NBA, maybe even longer past his actual contributions on the floor. And it's not a knock at all. I mean, I think that there's value in that, obviously, by virtue of guys like him continuing to find homes and being at the end of teams' rosters, so to speak. So shout out to Channing Frye on a tremendous career. It's not going to end in, a blaze of glory, on this kind of fumbling Cleveland Cavaliers team here. Frye has done a lot for the locker rooms that he's been a part of, and I think he will be missed in the NBA.
All right, man. There you have it. Another show in the books. My man Shaw and I dropping some gems for you, man. Awesome show this week with our man Scott Agness hopping on board. And hey, man, like he said, man, you need to start putting some respect on the Indiana Pacers name. They are not a one-hit wonder. And I think, Shaw, I think he raises a very good question on something that we're going to have to kind of, touch on a little bit more. There are a lot of teams right now, Shaw, that I really feel like from a market perspective, we can no longer look at them the same way that we did 20 years ago, under the David Stern era. I really believe that, we have to start acknowledging that some of these franchises have earned their keep. They have a tradition. They may not have as many championships as, say, the Celtics or the Lakers or maybe the Bulls or whatever the case may be, but they've established something. And I'm just waiting to see, like, to what Scott Agness's point was, I'm waiting to see when a free agent player will break through and get off of the whole, I gotta get in a big market to make a name. Maybe it's going to take a Russell Westbrook. Maybe it's going to take a James Harden, but I see like a guy like Steph Curry showing us that it could be done that way. So I'm just waiting to see when someone does that for the Indiana Pacers.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great topic of conversation, not just for Indiana, but all those teams out there that are close, you know what I mean, or could be considered close.
They're on the precipice.
The Portlands of the world, the old Memphis Grizzlies, so to speak. Where why didn't anybody ever think about going there to help Gasol, Zebo, and Conley, or whatever the case may be? I think this is something that players need to start looking and taking into consideration, and I think they are a little bit more mindful in general. Some people understand now that you don't need to be in the big market to make money, because the NBA is the most visible of all the sports, where you can get endorsements. People know your face, they know your vibe, they know your whole swag and everything about you. And if you play in a smaller town, you can still rise to a certain level. But let's not fool ourselves. It's definitely easier if you are in the bigger markets and there are more opportunities, but it's not to say that you can't still become somebody if you play in one of the smaller market teams that are especially very good. And I look to see what ends up happening with a team like Milwaukee this offseason as well, too. Seeing how far they go in this, does that open themselves up now to becoming a free agent destination? It starts in the buyer's market, where the guy like Gasol wanted to go, but now do other free agents say, you know what, Giannis is pretty damn good. Eric Bledsoe, who they've locked up as well too, you know what, this is a team that I think I can go here now and be that missing piece that they may need.
It's going to be interesting stuff, man. And I think part of that is how will this this last push, where these teams fall, where these teams find themselves, how competitive they're going to be come playoff time. I think a lot of eyes are going to be fixated on what's going to take place in the Eastern Conference playoff picture when it's all said and done, and it'll be out of the 2018-2019 NBA season. Once again, man, we'd like to thank our man Scott Agness. Be sure to check him out on Twitter at Scott Agness. For the Baseline, Cali, Warren Shaw. We love you guys, man, each and every single one of you. And we'll catch up with you next time.